All right, good afternoon, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We just started the live broadcast for those that are with us virtually. I hope everyone's had a good start to their conference, and I hope everyone's in the right room. This is for the San Pasqual Band of Mission Indians Microgrid Project. So if you're here to see the Microgrid Project, you're in the right spot. If you're here for a different one, you're in the wrong room. All right. So then this is a really big room. I thought I'd be in a little bit smaller of a room for this presentation to be a little bit more interactive, but we'll see how that goes. So my name is John Flores. I'm the environmental director for the San Pasqual Band of Indians. I've been with the tribe now for 12 years. We recently built a microgrid for the Tribal Government Center, and we're going to talk a little bit about this project. First of all, a show of hands out there. How many people know what a microgrid is? All right. How many people have built a microgrid out there so far? Okay, well, you know, it's quite a process. It's even more of a daunting process when you do it in the middle of a pandemic, but we got it done. So first, I'd like to acknowledge our project team. I did not build this by myself, obviously. It takes a team to accomplish anything. And this is the entire project team, starting from the tribe, myself and my staff at the environmental department, Melissa Morales, who's here at the conference, Vanessa Martinez, Desiree Morales, who's our utilities and TIPO manager, David Martinez, our public works director, and then our owners reps and the design build contractors on there. So that was the team. And as they say, teamwork makes the dream work. A little bit of general information about San Pasqual. We are in San Diego County. We're just up north from Viejas. Reservation was established in 1910. It's about 3,500 acres, 152 enrolled tribal members with over 1,600 lineal descendants. The population's a little over 2,000, between 2,000 to 2,500. We have 415 homes on the reservation, 93 of which have solar on them, and we have 96 EV charging stations on the reservation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our other stuff. This is the reservation. Everything in green is fee land that the tribe has purchased. Anything in orange is trust land. So the original reservation that was established in 1910 was just 3 parcels. It was District A, B, and C, which is the 2 large parcels you see up here. The backwards L looking parcel, that's District B. The one that kind of looks like a cleaver kind of knife is District A. And then this portion up here is District C. This going east to west is 530 acres that the tribe purchased and brought into trust. The majority of our population lives in Districts A, B. District C is lightly populated. It's mostly just rural open space. The casino, Valley View Casino, which the tribe owns and operates, is in the upper right-hand corner of District B. And that weird looking parcel off the map, that is a golf course that the tribe owns and operates. This is our housing density on the reservation. Everything in all these dots represent a home on the reservation. Every dot that is green has solar on their house. Every dot that's red does not have solar. So you can see how solar has been dispersed throughout the tribal community. Most of this is rooftop solar on homes, some ground mounted if their home, if the roof can't accept solar on the rooftop. Some of these homes also have battery backup systems now that we're getting into. So if there's a public safety power shutoff event, these homes will continue to have power with batteries and solar. This is our charging stations throughout the reservation. So we have 96 charging stations on the reservation for electric vehicles, probably the most in Valley Center. Might even be the most out in our whole area, Palma Valley and Valley Center. The majority of them are at our casino, of course. We have 38, but throughout the rest of the reservation, we have others at our government center, our environmental department, our park, our fuel center, and our golf course. Our golf course has 14. The government center has 26. Our education department has 2. Environmental has 4. And our ball field park has 10. All of our charging stations on the reservation are set to free. So if you visit us, if you're an employee of the reservation, if you are a resident of San Pasqual and you have an electric vehicle, you can plug in and charge at no cost, with the exception of the gas station charges. That they have fast chargers and they charge for those. Other than that, the other 94 charging stations are free. And these were actually constructed through multiple grants. The ball field ones, if you're from San Diego Gas and Electric had a grant program called Power Your Drive. They would install charging stations at multifamily unit apartment complexes or ball fields, parks. So we got those 10 through SDG&E. The 26 at the government center were funded through Cal EVIP. That was a California Environmental Vehicle Initiative program. We got about $900,000 for that. And then the 4 at the environmental department were through an EPA grant, through our GAP grant. And 6 are connected to our microgrid as part of our microgrid project. So why did we decide to build a microgrid? These are the 3 main reasons: resiliency, economic, and environmental. So the resiliency was to maintain power when electricity would be out, which was during, power shutoffs out in the backcountry, which I'm sure we've all experienced, whether you're in San Diego Gas and Electric territory, SoCal Edison, or PG&E. If there's a high fire danger event, high winds, they're going to shut the grid down due to fire danger. So resiliency was a main one. Economic, SDG&E has some of the highest rates. It might have the highest rates of electricity in the United States to purchase power. I think it's about 39 cents a kilowatt hour during peak hours. Our government center, on average, spends about $7,000 a month on electricity. So if you go over a course of a whole year, that's $84,000 that we're spending roughly to purchase power. And then environmental, the tribe wanted to try to reduce our emissions, our greenhouse gases. So we decided to build a microgrid. One of the reasons too, obviously, was what are our power supply threats in this area: severe weather, high winds, wildfires, earthquakes. And then of course, unplanned outages. Someone, drunk driver, distracted driver hits an electric pole and the grid goes down until they can come out and fix it. Impacts to us, our government center, we didn't have any backup generators. So if power goes out at our government center, everyone just gets sent home because there's no power. It gets really hot in our government buildings. And so we get loss of productivity, inability to use our facilities, and potential equipment damage, such as our servers, right? We have servers for our internet. Those things, get powered down, and that can become a problem for IT. So this is our wildfire danger history at San Pasqual. In 2003, there was the large Paradise Cedar fire that burned about 95% of the reservation. Over 100 homes, I believe, were destroyed in 03 from that fire. Reservation was evacuated for, I think, about 2 weeks before people could enter back onto the reservation. And then the 07 Pumacha fire, it burned about maybe 5% of the reservation. Luckily, that was on open space and no homes were lost during that fire, but the reservation was fully evacuated and power went down. So that's kind of the wildfire history in our areas. There's been other wildfires, smaller ones that have been contained, but these were the large ones that got out of control and severely impacted the reservation. One of the things we were looking at when we were talking as a tribal government of what we were going to do about power shutoffs and keeping operations up and running is how we were going to respond to these problems of climate change, increased wildfire, increased heat. And a lot of people want to just get backup diesel generators versus a microgrid. One of the reasons why they wanted a backup diesel generator was that's what they knew, and that's what they had always used. However, that was going to be pretty pricey for the tribe because we would have needed about 5 large backup generators for each of our government center buildings that we'd want to power. And really, the idea of using a diesel generator was using like 20th century technology to solve a 21st century problem. So we decided to try to go the different route, which was a microgrid, to connect all the government centers into one backup power supply rather than several. So this is after we penciled out the savings for the microgrid. It's going to be a little over $1.1 million over 25 years is what the tribe was looking at saving. Now, mind you, these numbers were done in 2017. So what has happened since 2017? SDG&E has raised their rate since 2017. So this number now is closer to about $1.5 million and increasing every year because every year SDG&E raises their rates. Grid power displaced, you can see about 272,000 kilowatt hours and 192 metric tons of greenhouse gas reductions. And that was just in the first year. So you can extrapolate that over 25 years. So what makes a microgrid? Anyone out there want to take a stab at it? I didn't know what a microgrid was before I started this project. So I'm going to be perfectly honest. I never knew what this was until we decided to embark upon this. But apparently, a microgrid is just using a combination of power generation and power storage to then power up a building. So in our case, or in any microgrid case, that can be anything from wind energy, solar energy, geothermal energy. Um, it can be diesel energy, propane energy, anything. And then how do you storage that energy once you've created it? Usually it's in the form of a battery or several batteries. And then the one thing that's a little different with a microgrid versus, say, a regular generator is when you turn that generator on, it's just going to power up that one building for as long as it's running, and it's just going to use that. A microgrid is constantly, it's like a smartphone basically versus an analog phone. The smart microgrid controllers is constantly running algorithms to know how much energy it needs for each building and how much energy to put towards the building and how much to store in battery storage. Our batteries, we can adjust how much energy we have in our batteries depending on the time of year. So when we're in high fire danger season, we want more of a resiliency factor on our microgrid. We'll keep and store about 50% of our energy in backup batteries in case we need it. When we go now into fall and winter, when the threat of wildfire is lower, we'll drop that down to only 20% of our backup batteries. And the algorithm will adjust it based on the parameters that the tribe sets forward. We're also still connected to the utility grid. So the utility grid is now kind of a backup to our microgrid. So our first generation of power is our solar. Second generation of power is our batteries that we store. And then if we need more energy, we take from from SDG&E's grid. If the SDG&E grid goes down, we island off, which means we fully disconnect from SDG&E's grid, and we power up our own grid through our microgrid. Now, none of this is done by human hands going out there and pressing buttons or disconnecting things or putting different wires in. Once again, the microgrid controller can sense when the SDG&E grid is unstable and goes down, and then there's a latency effect of about 5 to 10 seconds where then it then turns off of the SDG&E grid and fully powers up off of the batteries and solar. So these were our priority critical electrical loads to serve of the San Pasqual Community Government Center, our tribal administration building, our housing and police, our fire department, our education building, and our preschool. Our tribal admin slash tribal hall is an emergency Red Cross evacuation shelter. We can put about 100 cots in there to service people in times of emergency. Our education building is also an emergency public shelter, and our preschool is as well. And we can fit about another 50 to 70 people in those two buildings. The critical load for most of these buildings are what? It's your HVAC, keeping people cool. Nice thing about a microgrid with those smart controllers, if it's in time where the grid goes down, the microgrid will take full control of the HVAC system and begin to raise the temperature. Yes. No, the gas station is separate from the government center. We are looking at building a microgrid for the gas station. Um, they're just a little far from where it's at. So that's our next goal, is to put one at the gas station. So what did we install at our microgrid? These were all of our components. So solar PV, we installed 150 kW of new solar, which was through Canopy Parking. We had an employee parking lot that we did canopy parking with solar. We had existing solar at our education center. We actually just put in a propane generator as an additional backup system. We have our battery energy storage system, which is just all the batteries are in a large, like what looks like a Connex box. The controls are on site and remote. Remote in the sense I can log in from here at Viejas and see what the microgrid is doing and the controls, right? I can have a I have a separate login that I can check on what's going on. Plus the vendor that installed this for us, Gridscape, they're up in Fremont, California. They have remote access to the microgrid and can also, we have a O&M contract with them, so they're constantly monitoring our microgrid to make sure it's functioning the way it's supposed to. And if there's an issue, they bring someone down to fix it. Emergency management controls on our HVAC system. Like I said, if the grid goes down, it will start taking the HVAC. And if everything's set to say 70 degrees, it might bump that temperature up to 72 or 73 degrees. And lastly, we did 6 EV charging stations that are connected directly to the microgrid. So people, when they plug in, they're charging their vehicles off of the solar and batteries of our microgrid. So changes in service, San Pasqual and their government center, if you've ever been to San Pasqual, it's growing just like every area. There's old buildings and new buildings that we've added over the decades. So as those new buildings came in, they each got their own SDG&E meter for each building. So what we did is we removed each building's SDG&E meter and we installed one campus meter for the entire government center. So everything flows through that 1 meter now. The SDG&E power comes through there, and all of the generation through our microgrid goes through there. We had to upgrade our services from our buildings from a single phase to a 3-phase. And we did a lot of underground cabling throughout our government center to wire up all these buildings to connect them into the microgrid. How did we fund this? It was a combination of funding sources. First was the US Department of Energy. I wrote a grant with somebody. We got funded, fortunately. It was $703,000 in grant funding. California has a program. I believe they're going to refund it hopefully here shortly, called the Self-Generation Incentive Program, which is a battery rebate program. We got $600,000 from the state of California. Grid Alternatives, it's a solar nonprofit. They're nationwide. They've worked with a lot of tribes, I believe, in this room, actually. I know they worked with Rob at La Jolla. We wrote a grant. Parents had a accelerator fund grant. It was $150,000 we got from that. And lastly, San Pasqual is a member of the San Luis Rey Indian Water Authority. And we got funding through the Indian Water Authority for $703,000. So the total project you can see was a little over $2 million for this project. Now, lessons learned. Like I said, I never built a microgrid before. And we started this in 2019, in the fall of 2019. And then, of course, COVID happened. So we had COVID impacts, which were delays, supply chain issues, interconnection. Anyone who's worked with SDG&E or any investor-owned utility, SoCal Edison, Pacific Gas and Electric, they take a long time to work with to get basically the interconnection. So after we built the microgrid, so we're over here, we built our microgrid, and we're creating our own energy through solar and battery. And then SDG&E has their grid here. We had to get interconnected so that if we overproduce energy, like on a nice July sunny day when the sun's out, it's long days, we are overproducing power, and that power has to go somewhere. You know, we can only put so much in our batteries, and the buildings themselves can only use so much energy. So when our buildings, like say at 7 a.m., when no one's at work yet and the sun's out and we're producing all this power, or like say at 5 p.m. and everyone's gone home for the day and it's still sunny for another 2.5 hours, we're producing all this power, and the building's not using much because everyone's computers are turned off and the AC's, turned off. So the power has to go somewhere. And where is it going to go? It's going back to the grid. So we need an interconnection to send it back to SDG&E so that they can then take it and then sell it to everybody else out there in the world. They're giving us probably like 10 cents on the kilowatt, and they're selling out to all of you out there for 40 cents on the kilowatt. So we don't get our full rate on that, but we do get some credits that we use like in the winter time when we don't produce as much energy. Technical issues. How many people here have a government center that has a second floor? Anyone? Okay, if you have a government center that has a second floor, what do you need to have in that building to be ADA compliant? An elevator. So we turn on our microgrid the first day. Everything's going wonderful. Oh my God, this is working great. We did it. We're all patting each other on the back. I get a phone call. The power is out at all the buildings down here. What's going on with the microgrid? And we're at the microgrid. We had just turned it on. We're like, everything's fine here. Well, what had happened between us turning it on and 20 minutes later is post office comes, drops off boxes. The woman at the front desk has all these boxes. She loads them into the elevator, turns on the elevator. What do elevators take? They take a lot of power of that initial charge, that initial like surge, and it broke all of our breakers on our power, our microgrid. They turned off, right, to protect the system. So we had to set the tolerance because we forgot about the elevator. So some shakedown testing, stuff like that you don't think about. You build something and then you put it out into the world for people to test it and see what they find your flaws for you. And like I said, SDG&E was a lot of delays. During this time, and to be fair to SDG&E, it was during COVID, so SDG&E was working remotely themselves. A lot of people from SDG&E were retiring, because COVID caused a lot of people to decide I'm gonna just retire. So SDG&E was hiring on a lot of subs that were coming out to do some of their inspections for them. So we had to work with their subs, but we got it finally interconnected. The interconnection process took uh, 9 months. We turned it on in December, and finally in September we had full interconnection. So this is what San Pasqual's government center looks like, and this is how we interconnected all of our buildings. So, another thing about process delays. Originally, when we built the microgrid, here's where our fire department is right here. It was supposed to go behind the fire department, the batteries and all the material, all the batteries and the propane generator. But they didn't move those Connex boxes and behind them in time, so we had to move the microgrid over by the police station. So you can see the solar canopy that's at our employee parking lot. And then all the numbers you see were existing meters that we eliminated. And where that number 0 is, that's our new campus meter that we came in with the 3-phase power. So a lot of this was underground cabling or some cabling that we put on the building. And we strung all these buildings together into where the batteries are located right by the police station there. There's that same, just a little bit cleaned up photo or map showing it. So you can see our admin, tribal hall, police and housing, fire station, education, and preschool. That makes up our campus. And everything looks flat and on the same surface on a map, on a 2D map like this, but these are actually terraced. So if you're coming up, this is Kumeyaay Way, you're climbing up a little bit of a hillside and a slope. So education is below fire and fire is below the tribal hall. So we had to run this line, down the road and connect all these buildings to the meter. So the project status and accomplishments, pretty much everything is obviously completed now. The government center, we tied into the microgrid December 31st, 2021. and then we got permission to operate September 30th, 2022. So the microgrid has now been up and functioning for a little over a year now. And in that year, our utility bills went from about, like I said, around $84,000 a year. And this last year, we paid about $10,000 for energy. So you can see we saw a $74,000 savings in energy in its first year. It'll probably increase because SDG&E will raise their rates. So microgrid off-grid functions. So when we're on-grid versus off-grid functionality of our microgrid, off-grid functions, automatic island, and reconnection to the grid. So this is another key point. When SDG&E comes back on, when they bring their system back, once again, we're not sending someone out there to move wires or press buttons. The controllers of the microgrid will automatically know that the SDG&E grid is stable and functional again, and it will reconnect itself to the SDG&E grid. So it'll be our backup, and it'll be a seamless synchronization. We also put in a backup propane generator that you'll see in a moment. So the backup propane generator is our, in case it's winter time, the days are short, right? We're gonna set our clocks back here in another week and a half or so. So imagine it's December 1st, it's really cloudy, and so the solar is not producing at 100% because it's cloudy and it's a short day and the grid goes down. And we don't have enough battery storage to make it through the night. So then what happens? We don't have the sun. So we did end up installing a liquid propane generator on the back side of our microgrid that it will know from the controllers, because doing all the algorithms and calculating, it's constantly calculating on the fly. This is how much energy you guys are consuming, and this is how much energy you need to produce on your microgrid, whether it's solar or SDG&E or battery. But it'll, once it gets low enough in the battery that knows it's not going to create enough energy throughout the night or whatever it needs, it'll automatically turn on the liquid propane generator, and that will start charging the batteries and creating power for our microgrid. And all this is autonomous. I can log in and see it happening, but I cannot control it, right? I can't move things around. It's just all autonomous. This is a solar canopy we created. So this parking lot was existing. They're bifacial solar panels, 156 kW, their peak output. They're capable of charging our batteries from 0 to 100% within 3 hours. So if once again it's a disaster situation, say our batteries are completely depleted, you know, the sun finally comes up at 7 a.m. or 6 a.m. and then by 3 hours later, we'll be 100% charged back up. And this is the equivalent of about 37 and a half homes is what this would power. I'm sorry, what was that? 8 hours. So for 100% and there's no power coming in. So the question was, if our batteries are 100% charged, how many hours of energy does the tribe have stored for emergency operations? So assuming that we're not getting much from our solar because it's cloudy or it's a fire and there's ash covering everything, and the backup propane generator is not on, 8 hours is what the batteries can do fully charged. And that's running at 100% operations as if nothing is wrong, right? When in reality, if it's an emergency like a wildfire, chances are we're sending home non-essential personnel anyways. So it's not going to be status quo at the government center. The only people that will be left at the government center in a major emergency like a fire would more than likely be just police and our fire department, maybe our finance people cutting checks to get, you know, people money for a hotel stay if they're evacuated off the reservation. So once again, this is about putting something out there, functional testing things and figuring out what the problems are. So our PV lighting, this was nice. You know, we're out very rural. It gets very dark when you start setting your clocks back when we do that next hour. So at 4:30, it'll be fully dark out at San Pasqual on the reservation. So our employees didn't like, walking out. They were scared, I guess, walking out in the dark. I don't know. People don't like walking out in the dark for some reason. So we did put lighting out there. This is on a timer. So these are only timed to turn on. They're off now. Like 10 months out of the year, these lights are off. They're only on like basically when we set our clocks back till we set our clocks forward. And the timers kick on at 4 p.m. and they turn off at 6 p.m. Everyone's gone by 6. Now, police can turn these on or fire if there's an emergency happening and we need to light up this area. We can light it up and turn it on. If there's a function going on, we have a big children's Christmas party on the reservation every year. We'll turn these on for when people are leaving at the nighttime. So it's kind of nice to have. Majority months they're off. So one issue with these, though, I will say, we have a neighbor over near us, and the first couple nights we turned them on. She texted me. She's like, "John, what is going on at the tribal hall down below? It looks like a spaceship is landing in the parking lot." And the timers unfortunately hadn't been dialed in quite yet, so it was like 10 p.m. and they were still on. So each one of these has their own separate strings. So you can see like that middle one is off, and this one is closest to her house, the one that was lit up. So usually we'll keep that one. Will turn off first at 5 p.m. out of respect to her. Or sometimes we won't even turn it on because that middle one has enough light to really. I mean, you can see that one's the only one that's on. The other two are off, and you can see how much lighting is in the parking lot. At that day, all three of them were turned on, and she was like, "It's a spaceship landing here. Please turn them off." These are our charging stations. We installed 3 BTC Power EV charging stations. They're just level 2s. They're free charging. So when this happened, we had funding. I really wanted to put in 12 charging stations at the parking lot here. Tribal council was like, "No, you can put 2 in." And I said, "What about 10?" And they said, "What about 4?" And I said, "What about 8?" And they said, "You can have 6." I said, "Thank you." That was great because they said no one's going to charge because no one has electric vehicles. Within 6 months of these being in, we had 8 people with electric vehicles. We had 2 people with Teslas. Our vice chairman, he bought a Tesla. Some people had hybrid EVs to plug in. So then it got to the point that HR had to put out an email to staff saying, if you park and charge in the morning, please move at lunchtime to allow others to charge. This right here, because it's off of the microgrid, like during the day, this costs us nothing because it's being powered by the solar and battery. So, but if to answer your question, if you were tied to SDG&E grid, I've heard the it's like $1 maybe to charge in like your car, so $1 or so. Yeah, you can set your rate. Yeah. Yeah, so these do have we can set them. They're all set to free. The idea is if you're a tribal member, they're always going to be set to free. If you're an employee, they're probably always going to be set to free as a perk. Um, if you're a non-employee, non-tribal member, you probably gonna have to pay one day.
Yeah. So we have a charging station. We had some charging stations put in, and one is where our tribal office is at. And so we had it for the first year, and then Coddingtown, who we rent our tribal offices from, took that over, and they charge a rate based on what they get charged by the power company, and it's not very much.
No.
And they have a time that it shuts off, so you can charge for up to, it's a level 2. You can charge up to 3 hours. Uh, Now, I will tell you that if you leave it on all night and forget to disconnect it, you're looking at $100 bill.
Whoa.
Yeah, but if you're only charging like within the 3 hours, sometimes it's as little as $15. So it just it varies.
And also about those controllers on the microgrid, if it's an emergency, it cuts power to the charging stations. Those are like the first things that go, right? Is we're shedding non-vital loads when you're in island mode, right? So anything that's not vital, you're getting turned off. So this AC is getting bumped up, you know, those sort of things. That's what I want to do one day. We're not there yet. One day. The question was, do we have any? It's called, these are grid to vehicles, which means you're pulling energy from the grid to charge your vehicle. The next generation chargers that are coming out that I'm excited for, that we'll probably be going to one day, is called vehicle to grid, where you can reverse it. And if you have energy in your car, it'll then take that energy and run it back into your house. So let's say you live somewhere and the power goes out and you have an electric vehicle. Well, what is a car? When you look at a car, people use it mainly for transportation, but it's also a generator if you look at a car correctly. So if you have a electric car with a bunch of batteries, it's just a generator on four wheels. So what you would do then is you would plug your car in, you would switch your charging station from grid to vehicle to grid, and then it would power your home. And so that's kind of like a selling point that's coming out. So once again, if it's an emergency and your power's out and you don't have a backup generator to your house, but you have an electric car with a vehicle to grid charger, you do have a generator then. And all you would do is then or you run your electrical in your house off your car, and then hopefully the grid comes back on, and then you just recharge your car afterwards. So that's kind of the future where I think charging stations are going. It's going to be a big selling point to people to convert and put them in their homes. SDG&E transformer, that's our three-phase transformer. We had to install this. This is the battery storage system. It's a Gridscape Energy Scope microgrid in a box. They're basically like small Connex boxes. So you've all seen the big 40-yard or 40-foot Connex boxes. This is like just a half of one, and it's not nearly as big. But that's the best way I can compare it to. It's about the size of a small Connex box. It has on-site remote controls. They're lithium ferrophosphate batteries, so they're not lithium ion, lithium ferrophosphate, and it's 4 hours average load. So there's room. We're gonna add some more. So this one's the far right one in your picture. That's 100% full of batteries. This one's only half full, and we're thinking about using that GRIP grant, the Grid Resiliency Incentive Program, to purchase more batteries to fill this Connex box up all the way. Nice thing about these, you can they have lights on them. They're not on in this picture. They have green lights. The green lights means everything's good. Green's good to go. That means we're connected to the grid. The microgrid's working fine. Yellow means we're island. So when they go from they go green to yellow, that lets us visually know the grid is down and now we're island. And if they're ever red, that means we need to call someone, a tech or someone out here, because there's some issue going on within the microgrid. This is us installing the liquid propane generator. This was July 3rd. We had to crane it up and over the battery banks. Took us a long time to get this this generator. So once again, COVID was an issue. Suarez Canal got blocked, and then one thing that impacted finding this generator was the war in Ukraine. Because once the war in Ukraine started, a lot of generators were going to Ukraine for the effort there for the Ukrainians. And this wasn't just any generator. Once again, this had to be a smart generator. So this generator has controls that talks to the microgrid. The microgrid talks to the generator so that they know when to turn on and turn off. So once again, if this generator goes on, it's not like there's a human being going out there and turning buttons and turning it on. It's all done remotely on its own through the controls. And that's the microgrid. So that was the first time I ever built a microgrid. We're hoping to build a few more. It was quite the process. It's not as easy as it sounds. My number one thing is patience, 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 because everything takes longer to procure the equipment, working with your utilities, testing it. So preaching patience is the number one thing with a microgrid. Are there any questions in the audience?
Hey, John, you were talking about vehicle to grid a few minutes ago. I'm curious if you also decided to participate in the program, and I don't remember exactly what it's called, but it's when, like, the state of California, what is it, the ISO, the Independent System Operator, calls a need for power, and microgrids can then supply power into the overall statewide grid. Did you choose to
We
participate in
are.
that?
So that's a secondary market that they've opened up, um, where basically if they need more power on the grid, like during hot days and everyone's running their AC, and we have excess generation in our microgrid in our batteries, we can then sell it back to them rather than saving it, and then we just earn more money or credits, kind of. But yes, we did sign the paperwork and we're participating in that. I don't think we're gonna get a lot of money. It's not gonna be like a ton, but it's something.
Hey, John, congratulations on your microgrid. One question I have is, can you tell me more about the maintenance and upkeep of the microgrid? Like, did you have to hire any personnel to, and it sounds like autonomous very well, but any maintenance or upkeep that you can tell me about?
Yeah, so the company that installed it, Gridscape, we entered into a 10-year O&M agreement. So they do all the maintenance and upkeep on that. So that includes also software updates because, of course, it's the 21st century. What do you hear about all the time? Cyber attacks. Oh my goodness, someone's going to come in and ransomware because this is connected to the internet. So, a hacker could theoretically find this and take control of it. So, yeah, they handle all of that. They handle both physical upgrades, hardware upgrades, and also software upgrades because we're constantly upgrading our software on this for any hacks and patches out there in the grid. They're constantly monitoring this. I have a call with them tomorrow. We have a monthly call just to go over the microgrid every month to make sure everything's fine. They did just come out and repaired something like 3 weeks ago. Some of those lights that I was telling you about were disconnected and they weren't working anymore. And they sent someone down here and fixed the lighting on that. So yeah, we entered into a 10-year O&M agreement with them. So that's a good question though. But what happens if they go out of business? Because that happens all the time, right? So yeah, that's one thing you got to think about. Like when you're hiring, who vet them. This company has installed microgrids up in the Bay Area on a few different fire stations up there. So that's why we felt kind of comfortable going with them because they've worked with fire stations and they've also worked with like the Holiday Inn and put some on hotels of all places. But yeah, so the idea is, well, what happens if they go under? This is another reason why we decide to use the KISS method of keeping it simple, stupid. The more complex your microgrid is, and if that company goes under, the less likely another company is going to want to step up and take over that microgrid. Because there's lots of microgrid companies out there, and you'll have to probably enter into some sort of agreement with another microgrid company to take over O&M. But ours is very simple: solar, batteries, and a propane generator. But there are some that have flywheels and liquid that goes up and down like a float. It's something can get very complicated, and they will sell you the most complicated ones. But remember, at the end of the day, this is your system, and you're going to be the one taking responsibility of it. I don't want a Cadillac. I just want a reliable Honda Civic that's going to get me from point A to point B, put 300,000 miles on it, and will never fall apart.
Yeah. Did that O&M contract you signed into, was that funded through a grant or was that
Yes,
okay?
that was through the grant. So fortunately, the grant allowed for us to pay that O&M for 10 years.
So do you guys have a predictive lifespan on your LFPs?
25 years.
That's nice.
Yeah.
And the company that put them in will like warrant them for that amount of time, or
The manufacturer warranty is 15,
okay.
but the lifespan is 25. 20 to 25 years.
Hey, John, can you talk a little bit more about that O&M contract agreement? Like, what's your average cost over a year, or is it just one lump sum over 10 years?
It
How
was
did you guys negotiate that?
it was negotiated on the front end. They had different contracts that could go 5, 7, 10 years out. Because the grant was paying for it, we decided to go for the longest duration of the O&M agreement. Um, and it was a one lump sum payment that we paid them at the beginning of it all. Oh gosh, I want to say it was like probably close to $100,000. It was a substantial amount of money, but I mean, they do all the monitoring and maintenance of it, so it's worked out so far. We're 2 years into it, We're 1 year into full operation, so 1 year into it.
When it comes to purchasing the SDG&E purchasing power, they purchase at a wholesale rate for you guys.
Yes, they purchase that whole. That's all they do is purchase a wholesale
Okay.
rate.
So the reason I'm asking is I live in Sonoma County and we have a community choice aggregator there. And so Sonoma Clean Power will actually buy it at a higher rate to widen their green energy portfolio. And so if a tribe is in an area where they have a community choice aggregator, they could get a higher rate on the purchase of their excess power than if you're going through PG&E or SDG&E or any of the investor-owned utilities.
And San Diego just created a San Diego CC, yeah, community power. So I think we're gonna talk to them. Yeah.
So that's part of one of the incentives of community aggregation. Uh, and so they have a booth. They'll have a booth here tomorrow, but myself and another person, Kit Cole, will be here. So tribes that are within that footprint of San Diego County, some of that is sort of predicated on your environmental sort of thoughts of, do you want to purchase generation, clean, renewable generation, not directly from the IOU. And these are sort of choices that tribes have in their energy sovereignty, or, in terms of being able to purchase power, because the aggregators will want to buy power. And I know San Diego Gas and San Diego Community Power definitely has an interest in wanting to partner with tribes to purchase their power in their long-term agreements. So thank you for asking the question. But tomorrow there'll be a booth at the end, and if people are interested, we'll just be walking around. So very good presentation.
And I will say, we did a full bid process on this, like a 30-day bid. We had like several companies, come out. 3 of them put in bids. We went with what we felt was the best package on that, and then we negotiated with them over a few months about an O&M agreement and performance standards. So the O&M too, especially with the SCHIP. SCHIP is a program through the state of California where they have to verify how much energy you've actually used off your batteries. So we could have done that as a tribe and filled out that paperwork and saved maybe $30,000, or the company chose to do it and it cost $30,000. So we just had the company do it because that involves a lot of like calculations of how much energy you charge and how much energy you put back out there. So it's one less thing to do on these microgrids too. I'll say the hardest part, honestly, is the beginning. It's like the old saying, measure twice, cut once. So you're going in and you have to know how much energy all your buildings are using, right? And that can be difficult, especially during COVID, because obviously our energy usage during COVID, when everyone was working remotely, was much less than the previous year. So the hardest part is finding someone who can do those energy calcs. You're going to want to get your 15-minute interval data. You're going to want to calculate how much your entire footprint of your building uses. If you're putting charging stations, how many charging cars you're going to put out there. Because all this is part of the formula to figure out how much solar and battery and other energy you might need. And the latency issue, that's where the grid goes down, the microgrid comes up. You can get it where it's almost instantaneous, where it's just a little bit of like less than a second of downtime, but you're going to pay a lot more for that. So it depends on how important your operations are, where you're like, I don't want any interruption. Well, there's always going to be a little bit of an interruption from it switching from the grid to the island mode. We chose, 5 to 10 seconds is fine, right? We're a government center. We're not a bank. We're not a gaming enterprise, right? We're the government. And the ones that need it, like our servers, they have a backup battery, just dedicated for them, that they get about an hour worth on just that alone. And our chairman has a backup battery for his computer. Our CFO has one. Chairman, you always got to make the chairman feel very important, so he gets the best battery backpack out there, you know. So he had a really nice one we put on there, and the CFO. But these are things to think of when you're building your microgrid. Is you got to do these calcs or find someone that will do these calculations for you, because that's what you're going to be putting out to bid. Is like, this is how much energy we use, and this is what the microgrid is going to have to meet. So your pre-construction, pre-bid package is almost more important than what you're seeing behind you, because that's the recipe. right? So that's your recipe you're working off of, and that's the meal. So if you don't have a good recipe, you're not going to have a very nice meal at the end. So do your homework.